Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Student Success Funding Formula webinar. My name is MICHELE SIQUEIROS. I'm the president of the Campaign for College Opportunity, and we're really happy to have the opportunity to host this webinar for California Community College trustees. We are grateful for your time and for your leadership and service. We know that you don't get paid the big bucks to do what you do, but your work is incredibly important to the 2.1 million students in California that walk into our community college campuses with their dreams in hand. So I wanted to just briefly share my story and why I'm so passionate about doing the work that we do here at the Campaign for College Opportunity. What you see on your screen is my college graduation. And I used to always tell folks that I felt incredibly lucky to have been able to go to college and earn a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree from UCLA. But I very shortly realized that it certainly wasn't luck at all. In fact, it was all these things that you see in front of you. It was important and good public policy that provided federal subsidized loans. It was good California policy that provided me with a Cal grant and state aid that made going to college possible. It was good guidance and people that worked at my high school and tutors that came by and helped me fill out the FAFSA. And I'm especially grateful for those students who not only helped me complete the FAFSA, but also armed me with the appropriate response for what to tell my mother about handing over her tax forms so that I could actually submit the FAFSA. And I am incredibly grateful for past public policy like affirmative action that ensured I could enter the University of California, Los Angeles with a full fellowship and earn a master's degree in urban planning. So as you can imagine, I am passionate about the role of public policy in providing opportunity for students in our state and across our nation. And I strongly believe in the importance of good public policy and practice to make sure that all of our students are able to reach their dreams and earn a degree or credential. So thank you. And that's really what drives the work here at the Campaign for College Opportunity. We have been in this work for the past 14 years to ensure that students are able to reach their dreams. Many students, as you know, face a broken remedial education system. Every single student that you see on these slides is not from Getty Images. This is Lulu Matuti, who was super grateful that she was able to be placed in an accelerated remedial program at her community college. She was successful at transferring to Cal, and just a couple months ago earned her bachelor's degree from there. Often our students also face insufficient financial aid. And as most of us know, especially if we've grown up in low income or middle income families, financial aid is critical to covering the real cost of college. And it's not just free community college that does that. It's enough aid to buy books, to get to and from our campuses, and to afford housing. And too many of our students face a really complicated transfer pathway. That is why the campaign fought very hard in 2010 with then Senator Alex Padilla to ensure that we develop the associate degree for transfer. And we were incredibly excited to learn just a few months ago that over 100,000 students in California have earned that degree. All of these things, of course, are important revolutions that have happened to improve the pathway for our students, but funding is perhaps the biggest. We need to make sure, obviously, that our state leaders provide sufficient funding for our colleges and universities so that there is a spot in college at a community college, a Cal State or a UC, but we also have been very passionate about ensuring that colleges have the incentive to provide resources to better support low-income students and to ensure that more of their students are earning degrees and that we target closing racial gaps that persist in higher education. So as you know, our community college system is really the gateway of opportunity for more than 2.1 million students every year, and yet far too many, more than half, don't ever earn a certificate, a degree, or transfer after 6 years of enrollment. And if that doesn't make you angry or frustrated, then I'm not sure what should. We knew something must be done, especially when you disaggregate those completion rates for students of color. When only 6 in 10 Black and Latinx students fail to complete a certificate, degree, or transfer, or as I like to say, when 6 in 10 Black or Latinx students don't get the support they need from their community colleges to complete a certificate, degree, or transfer within 6 years, there truly is a moral imperative to move towards a more student-centered funding formula. And we are excited that last week, Governor Brown and our lawmakers answered the urgent call to do better by students by adopting a historic student success funding formula for community colleges. On behalf of the Campaign for College Opportunity, I really want to thank the amazing coalition of civil rights and education equity leaders and organizations and the countless community college trustees for their incredible contributions, not simply in just supporting the student success funding formula, but in making sure that whatever funding formula was going to end up in the budget was informed by their expertise, by their focus on ensuring greater student success. And of course, there are millions of students out there who'd like to thank each of you for focusing on their success. I cannot underscore enough what a huge win for California community college students this has been, and it certainly would not have been possible without the dedicated team of students, staff, equity coalition partners that I just referenced, and certainly the courageous college leaders that worked tirelessly to get this across the finish line. It goes without saying that the proposal was made better through your collective efforts and unapologetic equity focus. But let me say that this is not a new conversation. In fact, it has been a core priority of the Campaign for College Opportunity and many prominent civil rights, education, student, community, and business groups for the best part of the last decade. Under the leadership of Chancellor Eloy Ortiz Oakley and Governor Brown, we saw an opportunity most recently to continue to bring equity to the forefront of conversations about how best to craft a funding formula that really married access and the critical student supports that we know are what help students get to the finish line. Since January, when the governor first proposed a student success funding formula, we led strategic activities, including equity convenings across the state. We held a Capital Advocacy Day, and we targeted outreach to policymakers, legislative staff, and community members. And clearly, our efforts paid off. The revised and strengthened student success funding formula proposal really reflected all of the input provided by many of you, as well as others in the field, including community college CEOs and other leaders. The result is a formula that has the opportunity to transform colleges, better serve students, and really realize our equity promise and focus that as much as we care about you walking into our community college campus doors, we care just as much that you walk out with a degree or certificate or a transfer opportunity in hand. A real sincere thank you to the more than 35 organizations and hundreds of students, trustees, and partners that made their voices heard throughout this process. Today, you're going to hear from an esteemed panel of higher education leaders and researchers who will share a few words about the equity imperative for a student-centered funding formula. I really want to thank you again for taking the time to join us today. I'd like to really say that we have heard many times as we have championed transfer reform, remedial education reform, and the student success funding formula that these were impossible things that would never happen in California. I am proud to say that now we have achieved the impossible in getting a student success funding formula, and that is certainly thanks to the amazing, incredible, equity-minded leadership in our state. One of those amazing individuals is Pamela Haynes, who serves on the Los Rios Community College Board of Trustees and on the California Community Colleges Board of Governors. If you recall, Pam co-authored a compelling op-ed with the president of the Sacramento Urban League that appeared in Capital Weekly in support of the funding formula. Pam, thank you for your courageous leadership and ensuring the success of the funding proposal.
I'm delighted to be here. Good morning, everyone. There are many ways to view this new funding formula, but I encourage you to see it as a flashlight, an equity flashlight, if you will, on how well our colleges are doing to assist our students in achieving their educational and career goals, especially our historically underrepresented students, low-income students, and students in the underserved regions of our state. I also believe this new funding formula will help to anchor the change work already being done on our campuses. We have been funded with SSSP dollars. We've increased the use of our associate degree for transfers. We have begun to rethink basic skills to move toward acceleration. We are in the process of implementing the use of multiple measures in math and English instead of the use of assessment tests. The institutional restructuring of our colleges through pathways and the use of an equity and social justice lens as this work is being accomplished. It is a spotlight that will help to ensure transparency and accountability and is essential to achieving the ambitious goals of our system's vision for success, including increasing credential obtainment by 20%, increasing transfers by 35%, eliminating achievement gaps for our Black and Brown students and students living in underserved regions of the state, and lessening the time to degree. You may ask, what's the urgency? My response would be our students don't have 6+ years to reach their educational goals, and they are voting their dissatisfaction with their feet. You're going to have folks who will push against this or that element of the change work being done on your campuses. Your leadership as trustees is critical to keeping at the forefront of your discussions and your conversations what is important to the work being done on your campuses. That is the work that is research driven by actionable data, that everyone is held accountable for the outcomes, that transparency is key, and that equity is the filter through which we determine how successful we are. I believe that the new funding formula will help to move the system in the right direction. But more importantly, it will help us keep our eye on the North Star, our students, and what is in their best interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam, for those inspiring words, and I certainly appreciate your reminder that at the end of the day, this is all about the students. Next, and just a couple of housekeeping items for our participants on this webinar. Make sure if you have any questions for our guests, you're typing them into the chat box to the bottom right. We have some amazing speakers left to go on this webinar. We want to make sure we have an opportunity to address your questions. Next, we have Dr. Allison Bell, our newest addition to the Campaign for College Opportunity, our Vice President of Policy Research, who will provide you with an overview of funding formulas across the U.S. and to focus on California's funding model.
Good morning, everybody. If you look across the nation, 30 states are implementing and developing outcomes-based funding models similar to the one that was similar to the Student Success Funding Formula. HCM strategists recently conducted this review of literature and funding formula policies across the United States to both identify which states were implementing and developing funding formula models, and also to identify the best practices for developing those models. They identify a linkage to state goals, the inclusion of funding formula for base funding, including a significant level of funding, which they define as 25% or more, emphasizing degree and credential completion, reflecting institutional mission in the funding formula, ensuring that the funding formula encourages continuous improvement, emphasizing the success of underrepresented and low-income students, and ensuring that the funding is sustained and sustainable across years and budget cycles. Nationally, of the 25 states that are implementing and developing funding for outcomes-based funding models, 15 are at both the 2-year and 4-year sectors. 3 are at the 4-year only sector, and 7 are at the 2-year only sector. On this map, there are 5 states that are developing outcomes-based funding formula, including California. 6 states that have developed their funding formula models, but for whatever reason are not implementing them. And 14 states that are not yet having the outcomes-based funding formula conversation. In the 2-year sector, there are 5 states that have advanced funding formula models that satisfy all of the requirements and implementation strategies that we just talked about. Louisiana, Nevada, Ohio, and Wisconsin, the technical college system, all have high levels of funding, an emphasis on underrepresented students, recurring base dollars. Their funding formulas reflect the institutional mission. They emphasize degree completion, and they're sustainable. In California's funding formula, you see many of these characteristics. For example, the priority on Pell recipients and California Promise recipients. Metrics that are reflective of the mission, such as points for transfer, a good level of funding, and a phase-in process, a phase-in implementation process that allows institutions time to adjust to the new model. At this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Linda to introduce our speakers who will talk specifically about the California model.
Thank you, Ali. Again, I'd like to remind everyone that you are welcome to ask any questions. I do see a few coming in, and we have a section reserved for Q&A after our friends at the Chancellor's office share their update. You are on mute, so we welcome you to type in your questions in the chat box. At this point, we are going to hand it over to Christian Osmeña, Vice Chancellor of Finance and Facilities at the California Community College Chancellor's Office, and Laura Mattoon, Vice Chancellor of Governmental Relations, to add some California context to the national perspective that Ali shared. Christian and Laura?
Great, thank you. I'm Laura Mattoon. I'm the Vice Chancellor of External Relations for the Chancellor's Office. And before we begin, I just wanted to say that I came to this work with the Chancellor because I myself am a community college transfer student. I'm a first-generation college student, and I came to the Chancellor's office because I really believe in the mission of our colleges and the opportunity that we have right now to improve outcomes for students across our system. So I'm really honored to have this opportunity, and also to have the opportunity to partner with the campaign and with all of you as we work to implement this. I want to introduce my colleague Christian Osmeña, and also offer him the opportunity to make some welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Christian Osmeña, Vice Chancellor for Finance, and just wanted to say thank you all for working with us throughout this process. I think, as Michelle had mentioned, one of the, benefits of the legislative process was the active engagement of a wide range of stakeholders who really made improvements to the governor's proposal, and I think led to a formula that better serves the goals around equity and student success that we have as a system. So I think in my view, this was a process that really exemplified how we can best work with outside parties to make public policy better for our students.
So if we move to the next slide, you'll see that I've included here a quote from Chancellor Oakley. This quote was included in a message that he sent out to the system, to the CEOs of this system, to talk about what we really feel is an amazing opportunity that we have to really improve outcomes for students. The funding formula incentivizes student success. For the first time, the governor and the legislature took this action to really reform the funding for our system and move us toward the focus on successful outcomes for our students. And I won't repeat too much of what Board Member Haynes already said, but also in this message from Chancellor Oakley was a recognition that the funding formula is one part of our larger efforts to improve outcomes for students. We have so many important strategies underway right now across the system: the Guided Pathways Framework, the Student Equity and Achievement Program, the implementation of the California College Promise, AB 705, which guidance came out just this morning, helping our colleges improve assessment and placement. These are all among the various strategies that will help our colleges achieve the goals of the Vision for Success and truly ensure funding to support those goals. So if we move to the next slide, you'll see that the new student-centered funding formula has 3 buckets of funding. You'll recall that under our traditional funding model, all funding, virtually all funding, was provided in a base allocation that was largely based in how many students a college had enrolled at the census date around the 3rd week of the semester. Under this new formula, we transition away from that model. We still have some portion of funding based on that base allocation, the number of students enrolled, and a portion of funding is now based on supplemental access. This is funding focused on incentivizing the enrollment of traditionally underserved populations. In the version of the bill that was adopted, that focuses on students who receive a California College Promise grant, students who receive a Pell Grant, and our AB 540, our undocumented students. And then in the 3rd bucket of funding is our success allocation. And this is really focused on the momentum points and the success metrics that we know show improved student outcomes. If we move to the next slide, this slide is intended to explain a little bit about how the access allocation will work. So it's based on a point value. And so for students who are California College Promise Grant recipients, those traditional BOG fee waiver awards, they'll receive 1 point. A student who's a Pell Grant recipient is also worth an additional point. An AB 540 student is also worth an additional point. As we'll explain a little bit later in the slides here, each of those points has a monetary value associated with it. And I do want to point out that if a student is a Pell Grant recipient and a Promise Grant recipient, that's 2 points. Similarly, if a student's an AB 540 student and a Promise Grant recipient, that has a 2-point value. On this next slide here, it shows the supplemental success allocation, similarly based on a point value. On the left side here of the table, you'll see what we consider to be important momentum and completion metrics. Each of those metrics has a point value associated with it for all students. For students who are Promise Grant, formerly BOG fee waiver recipients, they would get those additional points there in that next column. And then for students who are Pell recipients, they get an additional point level. And again, each of those points carries a monetary value with it. The next slide shows the phased-in approach that the legislature has taken to implementing this change. So in 2018-19, 70% of the funding will be based on that base allocation, the number of students enrolled. 20% of the funding will be based on the number of students, low income, AB 540, and Promise students enrolled. And then 10% of the funding will be based on that supplemental success. You'll see underneath that the amounts of each of those values and point amounts. You'll see here that in 1920, we begin to phase in an increase in that success value, now 65, 20, and 15. And by 2020, 2021, we go to full implementation at that 60, 20, 20 measure. And you'll see the changes in the point values and the base allocations as identified there. Just a few things I wanted to mention is that all districts will be held harmless in 18, 19, 19, 20, and 2021. That means that they'll receive the greater of either the 17-18 level adjusted by COLA or the amount that they would get in the new formula. I also think it's important to note that non-credit students are maintained at that current level of funding. There's no effect there. And then it also allows for colleges to continue something called summer shift, where that summer term can be calculated either at the beginning of the year, of the academic year, or at the end of the academic year. On the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about how we ensure implementation of this formula truly improves the capacity of our colleges to serve students and our students' outcomes. So the first point I wanted to make is just about goals. Earlier this year, our Board of Governors adopted the Vision for Success goals, by which they'll be evaluating our system. Board Member Haynes talked a little bit about those goals, so I won't spend too much time on that, but I will just add that under the new funding formula, districts will be required to adopt goals aligned to the Vision for Success by January 1 of 2019. Districts will also be required to align their comprehensive plans and their budgets to those goals. In order to ensure that colleges have the capacity to make the changes necessary to improve student outcomes, the Chancellor has the authority, if he's directed by the Board of Governors, to require districts to use a certain amount of funding for technical assistance and professional development to help them implement some of those successful strategies that we know will improve student outcomes. And then finally, our goal and the goal of implementation of this funding formula is that it will align to the other efforts underway in our system: Guided Pathways, AB 705, our support programs. If you forward to the next slide, just want to spend just a minute talking about our next steps. So the legislation indicates that the legislature will be establishing an oversight committee. The legislation that was approved indicates that the legislature will make a decision about the shape and scope of that oversight committee by the end of this legislative year. So we should know a little bit about what that oversight committee will look like by the end of session, which ends at the end of August. What we do know right now is that it will have 15 members, and very generally they're directed to assist in continuously evaluating and reviewing implementation. The legislature will be responsible for developing the membership, their duties and responsibilities through that subsequent legislation, which we should see in the next month and a half. The other thing that's happening right now is that Vice Chancellor Osmeña has developed a cross-divisional working group within our system, bringing together student services, academic affairs, to really understand how we best implement this funding formula and how we help colleges understand what transitions they'll need to make locally to maximize opportunity under the funding formula. And then the final thing I wanted to mention is that there will be reports to the legislature and the Department of Finance on how well we're doing in advancing the goals of the Vision for Success. And our report is due by July 1 of 2022. So I just wanted to take a minute here and talk about how the proposal was amended to really reflect the equity concerns and recommendations that were raised through some of the work of the Campaign for College Opportunity and others across our system. First, we were successful in securing amendments to expand who would be covered under that supplemental grant, to include not just low-income students, but also undocumented students. There had been a recommendation to look at first-generation college students, and that's something our office is still very much interested in pursuing. The challenge we had is that the data currently available in the Chancellor's office around first-generation students is not something we felt that was reliable. So one of the directives of the Oversight Committee will be to figure out how moving forward we can begin to include first-generation students in that Supplemental Access Award. I also wanted to point out that there was an addition of success key momentum and progression points in that outcome side of the equation. One of the most important, in my mind, is the inclusion of that transfer level math and English achievement. It very much aligns to the work under AB 705 and the work that the campaign has been doing for many years to improve college practices around this point. There was also, we also included momentum points that focus on our career technical education students, achievement of 9 units, that will also be included. And then I also wanted to point out that we included the associate degree for transfer at that highest level of point value. And the idea there is that we really want to incentivize this pathway for our students. We know that students who graduate with an associate degree for transfer are more likely to complete in a quicker time frame upon transfer to the CSU. We're beginning to establish those ADT pathways to our UC partners. And in fact, at Monday's Board of Governors meeting, they'll be approving an MOU to establish that associate degree pathway with our private nonprofit partners with the AICCU. And then the other two things I just wanted to mention is the establishment of that statewide oversight committee. That was a recommendation that came through the campaign and through others, that there be continuous monitoring of the progress of implementation. And then finally, that we allow colleges an adequate phase-in period, so all colleges have an opportunity to see success under this proposal. That's the end of my remarks. I'm not sure if Vice Chancellor Osmeña has anything to add at this point.
No, happy to take questions when appropriate.
Thank you so much for your incredible expertise and giving this group sort of like a first preview and a deep dive into the funding formula, the point system, the overview, the phase-in approach. I think this is one of the many requests that the trustees had for us months ago, was to get an overview of what this would look like so that they can take this information back to their districts. So I really appreciate Michelle, Ali, Christian, Laura, Pam, your insights and your presentation over the funding formula. We do have a few questions, and we have quite some time dedicated to this Q&A section. I have a few that have come in. As we read these out, I will defer to the appropriate person, both in our Sacramento office here in LA, to answer. And please, folks, please feel free to type in your questions as we move along. So I have a question from Griselda Delgado, and this one I will field over to Christian and Laura. What will happen to the colleges that do not meet those percentage targets?
And I think we might be, so the funding formula itself doesn't have percentage targets. So the funding formula itself would be allocating resources based on the counts of students who are either have the characteristics that are recognized under the formula, or meet the outcome measures, progression measures that are included in the student success portion of the formula. Part of this, as Vice Chancellor Mattoon mentioned, is about adopting goals pursuant to the vision for success. Our office will be providing guidance on those goals. I think the intent of that language is to better align these statewide goals with how colleges are designing their comprehensive and academic plans. There's no mechanism in the statute that specifies a particular outcome. I think, as Vice Chancellor Mattoon mentioned, there's authority for the Chancellor, with approval from the Board of Governors, to work with a college to figure out how to use some of the resources allocated under the formula to improve progress and to make progress towards those goals. And so that's work that our office will be undertaking, both on building capacity to support colleges, but also figuring out what that relationship will look like between the Board of Governors and the Chancellor's office and the local district.
Great, thank you, Christian. I have another question from, well, there's no name connected to it. You walked us earlier, Christian and Laura, through the revisions that were incorporated as a result of these statewide conversations through our college CEOs, different work groups, and of course the Equity Coalition partners earlier this year. And that question, I believe, was answered, but will there be some suggested talking points, a fact sheet, anything that our trustees and college allies can take back to their respective boards to share, especially for those who were not involved or were not in the loop, really, as they may have been throughout this year?
Okay.
Sorry, we're working through that implementation team. So part of the Chancellor's Office implementation team is a heavy emphasis on how we begin to communicate this effectively. I think very soon we will have a fact sheet that will be available for you all to share. We're hoping to have a PowerPoint deck that could be used in a variety of settings. So we are hoping to provide you with the resources you need to be informed communicators of the changes in the communities you serve.
Great, thank you, Christian. I have a question from Joseph Williams, who's a trustee at San Bernardino Community College District, and he's asking, what can local trustees do in terms of questions they should ask and possible policy to ensure the successful implementation of this new funding formula?
So this is Pam Haynes, trustee, Los Rios Community College District. I believe that the questions can be asked both in a public setting as well as in a private setting. The public is much more powerful, and it sets out a perspective. And a question just as simple as, would you please share with us the status of your implementation strategies and provide some data around how that will change some of the success indicators, some of those how will those metrics change. So for example, AB 705 is in the process of being implemented. It has the possibility of absolutely changing in total numbers how students enter our campuses and timelines for them to be placed into a math, or for them to place themselves into a math and English class that leads them into, that will allow them to transfer. So asking those kinds of questions about even sort of the equity work that's being done, about AB 705, about how that's working out. And then I'll use the word requiring, but these require really responses that are based and centered around data. I don't think it's acceptable for us as trustees to say, oh, things are going well, and that be the end of the conversation. The question is how well? Can you be very specific? Can you provide some background and some numbers, some data that supports what you are doing? And so it's those simple questions that requires accountability and transparency, and for the district and for staff to get back to you in a setting and with information that will be helpful in you determining where the district is or where your college is in implementation, to make certain that you're on the pathway to increasing your numbers of successful students.
Thank you, Pam. I'm sorry I didn't deflect to you, but I'm glad you jumped in. We have a few more questions, so thank you, presenters, for your patience. I have on deck right now 4, and the next one is from Jim Osterling, who is at Pasadena City College. This one I could, I'll flag to Pam, Laura, or even Jesse, if Jesse Ryan's there. Do the college CEOs, or the CBOs, I'm sorry, in each district have sufficient information on the funding formula to calculate the impact to their respective districts? Probably a Christian or Laura question.
Sure. I think the CBOs, our office will be providing more information to the CBOs. I think in general, the calculation should be relatively transparent and the data is generated locally. So I think CBOs could do it. That said, the Chancellor's office recognizes that we need to provide more information in the coming weeks about what that calculation looks like. And so our intent is to provide revised simulations as soon as possible, but certainly by the beginning of August, that reflects clearer definitions for colleges to use about how they would pull that data from their own systems, and in places where they would need some information from the Chancellor's office, we would have mechanisms for them to pull that information. And then I think our intent is to provide an easy roadmap from going from that raw data, working it through the simulation, working it through a set of calculations, and then providing the outputs that generate a good sense of what their funding would be in the coming years. So I think there is some work the CBOs can do locally, but I think we intend to provide pretty intensive support in helping them do that crosswalk between where they are today and what their funding would look like in the new formula.
Thank you, Christian. The next question is from Griselda Delgado. How are districts using LCAP monies? If you recall, LCAP is local accountability, using the local control accountability plans to target our underperforming African American and Latinx students. I would suggest fielding that to either Jesse or really opening the floor to any of our team to answer.
Hi, Linda. I do want to clarify. I think the question that Griselda had was how we're partnering with our post-secondary districts around the conversation about LCAP money and alignment for our most challenged student populations. And I think that that is really key as we develop data sharing agreements across the state and look to better serve students who often slip through the cracks. I know that Vice Chancellor Mattoon has been leading much of the AB 19 College Promise work and really looking at, outside of just a commitment of free community college, how do we provide the appropriate supports and interventions to meet the needs of student populations. So I'm going to have her talk a bit more.
I think that Jesse was exactly right on in bringing up AB 19 and the California College Promise program. You know, this idea really generated from something that Campaign worked on many years ago around how powerful it can be to a student who doesn't see themselves on that college trajectory to be told that they can go to college, that there's a clear pathway for them to get to college, and that there's money available to help ensure their access and success. And so when we worked with Assemblymember Santiago around AB 19, we ensured those requirements that colleges engage in some of those activities, reaching out to low-income communities, talking to students and families, engaging in dual enrollment and other activities that can help students enter college prepared. We also required that colleges comply with AB 705 and ensure that they're properly assessing and placing students into the coursework for which they're prepared. And we required that they participate in the Guided Pathways framework. And so you can really see there the integration of the California College Promise with these other strategies that are underway. Just speaking personally, I'm a member of my local parent advisory committee for the LCAP, and I do think there's so much opportunity for us to use College Promise to increase engagement and connection between our high schools and our community colleges. One thing that our district has really looked at is why is it that our students of color have such lower graduation rates, and what really are the factors playing a role here. One thing we discovered was math strategies at the K-12 level were really hurting students both graduating from high school and how they entered into our system. And so one of the things in AB 19 is the ability to use those dollars flexibly. So if you wanted to use your AB 19 dollars in order to increase dual enrollment partnership opportunities with your high school, to focus on something like a math strategy, that would be an allowable expenditure for those dollars. So it seems to me that those are really important questions that trustees can evaluate and look at as they think through how they want to develop their promise programs locally.
Thank you so much, Laura, for addressing that question, and Jesse for getting that started. I have two more questions. Again, we have a little bit more time for additional questions. Make sure you chime in. This one, I'm not sure who it's coming from, but it's a good one. What can be done to ensure the first generation college student indicator is phased in after 3 years in face of data challenges? I'm fielding this one to our friends at the Chancellor's office.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're going to need a lot of advice on is what are the best data elements to use to capture that population of students. So I think working with the folks on your campuses, obviously the chief business officers, but also the folks who work in your technology areas and your management information systems areas, to talk with them to better understand at your local level how you all report first generation students, And then I think we would love advice from you all, and we're, I think we are going to work closely with the campaign to figure out what that looks like and how we can produce a valid and reliable measure of first-generation students that has the confidence of the colleges that it accurately represents their populations. So I think your advocacy, both locally and then working with our office and with your other partners to make the case that it represents something that is meaningful and captures a population of students that it faces especially high barriers.
Great, thank you so much. The last question I have here, and again, I welcome you all to share additional thoughts, questions on the chat box, is from Griselda Delgado, trustee at Southwestern Community College District. How do you recommend we frame the rationale of the funding formula to faculty that are completely against it? I welcome Pam to share some thoughts, even Jesse, Laura, Christian.
I'm gonna have Jesse start this, and then I'll bring up the rear end.
So, I would say, as a former community college product myself, and someone who has worked quite closely with those in the field around how we talk about this very difficult and at times controversial change, I think that you have to lead with students and the equity argument. I think that Trustee Haynes has done a beautiful job of articulating the equity imperative, and it's very difficult to justify perpetuating the status quo in the face of completion rates that show that we are failing 6 out of 10 Black and Latinx students. What I found was that in the strength of social justice and civil rights partners, former community college products, and trustees like Trustee Haynes, we were really able to silence detractors in large part because the arguments against the proposal centered around timing, centered around concern with rate of change, and did not often even mention students. And so at the end of the day, as trustees, your charge is ultimately to safeguard student success and to remove barriers to progression and completion. When you lead with that argument and recognize that our faculty are doing their best, often against great odds, but need to also be willing to lean in to doing things differently if we are not producing the intended results for students who are struggling the most.
So thank you for that, Jesse. And I completely concur with that. I would also say that on our campuses, there have been loud voices in opposition to this, but those were just loud voices. In many respects, the majority of our faculty, those on the ground in the field who are working with our students, are in support of their success. What we have in common, I truly believe, is that we care about students. Now, how we get to helping them with their success, we may have differences of opinion. We have tried to do it the current way, and the data shows us that we have been unsuccessful with many of the students that we care most about. It is truly time for change, and I believe, given some of the initiatives that we are implementing and the work that faculty is currently doing with our students, faculty and staff, that we can really turn the dial, turn the conversation into what do we need to do next to help our students. We have a plan, we have a platform, we have funding, we have a number of things that we are currently doing, and we need to have all of those pieces working in unison on behalf of our students. And I absolutely agree that we have got to keep students front and center. I am one of those community college students that started out of high school, continued after having babies, continued after a divorce, transferred to UCLA, and went on to Harvard. It took years and years. I would not wish my pathway on anyone. I am the exception. I don't want our students to be the exception to the rule. I want the rules to change in benefit and in service to them. I believe that the funding formula and all of the work that our our faculty are currently doing in the change kinds of work that they are doing on our campuses is that plan and is that pathway.
All right, wonderful. I believe that is it for the questions. There has been a comment made about the usefulness of this conversation. Of course, this conversation could not be as rich as it is without your contribution. So I really want to thank our participants for sharing some wonderful questions and participating in this conversation. This webinar is being recorded. Once we convert this into a video, we will make sure to share it with you all and upload it on our website so that you can also share it with your colleagues who weren't able to attend. I actually could not have timed this question more perfectly, because up next, our Executive Vice President will be sharing some additional thoughts on how you can continue to be engaged in this conversation moving forward. So, Jessie?
Thank you, Linda. And I want to take the opportunity again to thank Trustee Haynes and my colleagues at the Chancellor's office for the leadership that they have exerted in ensuring that the student-focused funding formula made it across the finish line. I have to say, I am moved by Trustee Haynes' passion and dedication to student success. As the first in my family to go to college and a proud product of California community colleges, my journey is reflective of so many of the 2.1 million students who enter the doors of the community college hoping for opportunity to reach for a lifetime of success. I actually went to 3 community colleges simultaneously so that I could get the classes I needed to transfer within 2 years. I did that while working 35 hours a week and with very little support. And I
Jessie, we just lost
my apologies. Yes. No, it's okay. My apologies. It looks like we had an audio issue. I was fortunate. I was lucky enough to be one of about 4% of students that will successfully transfer within 2 years of entering a community college. But I found that unacceptable. And what has often kept me up at night all of these years later is the peers that I had in classes who were equally deserving, who were also hanging their hopes and dreams on the opportunities provided them by their community college and didn't make it through. I have been very lucky over the years with my work at the Campaign for College Opportunity to focus on removing barriers to student success. And frankly, I know that much of the criticism around the funding formula has been that alone this will not be transformative. But I think what we have to recognize is that while the funding formula is not the silver bullet, taken together with the reforms that have been instituted by Pam and her colleagues at the Board of Governors and under the leadership of Chancellor Eloy Ortiz Oakley, we truly have an opportunity in a way that I have not seen in my more than decade of doing this work to finally significantly move the needle on student success. Gone are the days where we celebrate 1% gains in students moving through remediation. We have to be looking at all of the students that are lost along the path as we wait to become comfortable with making the necessary changes to better meet their needs. I know that I've often talked about in my work this knowledge that the community college system, as beautiful and remarkable as it is, talks a lot about what students need to do to be college ready. Well, we're now at this tipping point where our California community colleges have the tools and the leadership to finally design colleges to be student ready. And that, for me, is when we will see true transformation on behalf of students who have traditionally been left behind. I want to talk with you for a few minutes about opportunities for your continued engagement as trustees across the state. In many ways, you are our ground warriors for advancing this work. You have before you this bully pulpit to have critical and courageous conversation around student progression and completion. And believe me, while we are proud of the funding formula, which as Vice Chancellor Ousmina said, is greatly strengthened and improved through the contribution of equity partners and trustees across the state, we know that this battle is not won, that ultimately implementation will be everything. Implementation will lead to success if done well. So we have before us an opportunity with the implementation oversight to truly have impact. We at the Campaign for College Opportunity are thrilled that the recommendation of more than 35 equity partners across the state, social justice, civil rights leaders, and strong trustees made it into the final proposal to establish an implementation and oversight committee. We do see that as being a critical opportunity to not only move the work in a student-centered way, but make adjustments as necessary. As we heard Vice Chancellor Metoun speak about the first generation indicator, this for us within that work group is an opportunity to continue to push on strengthening our student supplemental grant to truly capture all of our most challenged student populations. We have at the Campaign for College Opportunity submitted a list of candidates for consideration to the Implementation and Oversight Committee, both with the Chancellor's office and with the Governor's office. Whether or not we see everyone we hope to be included on that list of internal and external stakeholders who will really make up the Oversight Committee, we do believe that you as trustees should be monitoring the work and looking for opportunities to provide input to the individuals you know who have a direct line of communication by sitting on the committee, and to others as they're shaping the implementation work moving forward. I also think that it's an opportunity for you to continue to bring implementation updates back to your district and include them as a source of conversation in closed session and from the dais. I also want to talk to you about early alignment. I think that Trustee Haynes, Vice Chancellor Metoun, and Vice Chancellor Ousmina really eloquently articulated that this is not one reform, that this is a reform alongside a set of ambitious student-centered initiatives that truly has the opportunity, when taken together, to be transformative. And what that means is that we know, as Vice Chancellor Metoun discussed, that our districts will be required to adopt goals by January 2019 aligned to the Vision for Success. We know that in some community colleges and in some districts across the state, those conversations have already begun. This is an opportunity for us to really ensure that these initiatives are not existing in silos, but that there is full integration of the work in such a way that the planning is done at the front end to ensure that we significantly move the needle 3 years after the hold harmless provision is removed. What I do know is that at a local level, college leaders like Michael Gutierrez at Sacramento City College are already pulling together their academic senate presidents, some of their key deans, their vice presidents of instructional services, et cetera, to talk about how do we, using the Vision for Success goals, using the progression and completion markers articulated in the student-focused funding formula, develop a set of practices at the campus level that we believe will significantly improve student success. They're not waiting for 6 months or a year. They're talking about this now in recognition that every stakeholder group on a campus will have to play a role in ensuring that we actually improve both the progression and completion of our students. So to the extent that you as trustees can begin those conversations, ask your college presidents, ask your leadership what they're doing to have similar strategic conversations, how they're integrating the various initiatives, and what they're doing to really develop a set of actionable policies and practices for each of the Vision for Success goals will be critical moving forward. I think that you have an opportunity and a platform as trustees for continued ongoing policymaker education. We know that the rate of the student success funding formula conversation movement in this past budget session was difficult for some to absorb. We saw that in January, one proposal was introduced. We at the Campaign for College Opportunity hosted a set of equity dialogues. The Chancellor's office worked with CBOs and presidents across the state to garner their feedback. But there was a significant amount of movement in a fairly truncated period of time. And so we found at the Campaign for College Opportunity that even into May, post-May revise, we had to do a significant amount of work in educating members of the legislature about the changes. And I would argue, as we continue to be contacted by individuals, that we need to do our best to share what the provisions of the final proposals were and how that incorporated feedback from critical stakeholder groups in the field. I think that you'll also have to really exercise your leadership and how you are, as ground warriors, the eyes and ears on the ground of implementation work, to take back your observations, reflections about what's working and challenges, and continue to share them with policymakers moving forward as a tool for change. And so I hope that you'll work with the Campaign for College Opportunity and others to be a conduit of information for policymakers as we continue to strengthen this proposal. I also want to say that in implementation, we are going to see a transition of the current administration into a new governor and a new administration very shortly. And so, as we know, our new administration might have ideas about continued opportunities to strengthen and enhance the proposal in its implementation stages. And so we need to ensure that this remains a top priority of our next administration, of our next governor. And we need to make sure that our members of the legislature continue to have the appetite for better serving our students through the funding formula and other reform efforts. You, I think, are critical partners in sharing that information. Finally, I want to offer the Campaign for College Opportunity as key partners and resources on this journey. I know that over the years we've engaged you in a variety of different ways, from listening tours on the ground to serving as advisors on research that we've done, groundbreaking research across the state. We will continue to look to you to share information based on your observations of implementation opportunities and challenges. But we also want to ensure that you see us as a resource as we draw best practices on implementing a student-centered funding formula change from other states, lessons learned, and pitfalls to avoid. And so please continue to call on us, and don't hesitate to reach out to Linda in our LA office, to myself or Sarah in the Sacramento office, and other members of the team. I also want to mention that we will be hosting a reception for our trustees at the Community College League of California's annual conference. That's going to be at the Westin Mission Hills Golf Resort and Spa on November 16th from 7 to 9 p.m. You'll recall the campaign has had some critical and courageous conversations through our report Left Out about faculty diversity and the diversity or lack thereof of governing boards. We see you as key allies in this work, and we hope that you'll join us at our CCLC reception. Finally, in closing out today's webinar, I just want to point out how significant this funding formula work has been. I have been privileged over more than a decade to get to embark on higher education advocacy for the benefits of students across the state, and with a particular focus on community colleges, given that they serve as the gateway to opportunity for the vast majority of students. I can tell you unequivocally that in the past 18 months, under Chancellor Eloy Ortiz Oakley's leadership, with the Chancellor's team and with leaders on the Board of Governors, I have seen more movement towards ensuring that we design systems focused on student success than I had in the 8 years prior to that doing this work. This is difficult change. The rate of change can be often challenging to absorb. But as Pam spoke earlier, as Trustee Haynes spoke earlier about the urgency of now, there is a sense of momentum that is palpable. And I want to thank each of you as trustees in the field for courageously embracing this work and recognizing that with an influx of resources, we have to be willing to ask, what are we doing that we should not continue in terms of practices? How can we embrace new practices that are evidence-based, that have the potential for significantly moving the needle on student success? And how do we help shift mindset so that we recognize that our institutions are not just open access, but should be focused with equal intensity on student progression and student success? We know that the leadership of each and every one of you will be critical to seeing that student-centered vision into fruition. I want to once again thank you for your time this morning. Thank those of you who joined the call and our presenters, as well as our Board of Governor Representative and Trustee Pamela Haynes. We know that this is difficult work, but it's absolutely necessary. And I just want to close with one of my favorite quotes, which is that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it produces, which is from a scholar and change management theorist, W. Edwards Deming. And what that says is when we have results that are unconscionable, when we are not getting the results that we would hope to achieve for students who are traditionally left behind, we have to ask how we can do things differently and what practices are contributing to those results. And I think that we're finally at a pivotal moment in time where we're embracing the need for change, and we're recognizing that we have an opportunity before us on the horizon to radically reimagine our systems to be designed to be student ready and to focus on student success. And with that, I thank you and I hope you have a wonderful day. We will be shortly posting this webinar, including the PowerPoint, and hope that you'll share it with your colleagues as you continue to help implement this work and share this information in the field.